Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dream Collective Weekly Recap. The last Sunday, we talked about what mental health is, what that looks like for us that are undocumented, documented, dreamers, etc. And just to recap a few things, we had many takeaways from this. So many people talked about how mental health was not important. It was not talked about in our communities, in our families. Other people talked about how they still haven't found a way to deal with their mental health or found a therapist. And so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and ask Christian, what was the one thing that surprised you in this conversation we had this past Sunday about mental health?
The biggest thing that surprised me is, and at the same time, I feel like I've done this myself, but not reaching out for professional help, right? Like like you said, we've grown up in like our communities and our family where mental health is not a thing. Therapy, what is therapy, right? Like I grew up without any notion, idea of or agency to know, like, if you need help, if you're feeling, anxious, having a tough time dealing with emotions, you should probably talk to a professional. So I self-medicated in a way throughout my whole experience. Um, I went out of my way to find my own help, did my own work. And I think it's mostly because we don't have the resources. We don't have I think some people said like it would be awesome to find a therapist, but it would be nice to have someone that's walked through that path, right? Or at least that knows what it feels like to be an immigrant or a Latino or an undocumented person. We unfortunately have limited resources at an advantage. And I think that was the biggest surprise, that we're still in that fight to normalize professional help, therapy in our communities. What about for you?
I think for me, what surprised me the most was, again, I think we had talked about this earlier in the other recap, is how different states accommodate or don't accommodate for immigrants. And so for me, it was just depending on the state we were living in, some of us felt really angry about our lives, about being an immigrant, and other people were very positive. We had a few people they had this radiant energy of like, well, yeah, I know this journey has been terrible or not for some of us, but just make the most out of it, especially with what we got with Daca, because that's a privilege in itself. While other people understood that without Daca, they wouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. And so then being able to relate to those positive people, then there were people on the negative spectrum. And I'm one of those negative people where it's like, why me? Someone said, like, why is the world doing this to me? And we have that imposter syndrome / victim mentality. And another speaker also talked about how we shouldn't be putting ourselves in the victim mentality. And so again, we're not essentially divided, but I think we're on a spectrum of we're either super positive, super negative about like who we are in this country, or we're right in between where some of us know how to handle our negative side, and then some of us, and we can also be positive at the same time. We do that light switch of, yes, it's negative, we're dealing with this. Oh, I hate having DACA because it's a 2-year installment. Like you said, we always have to be reminded of this every year and a half, where we have to gather all the money to renew. And then some of us is like, okay, that's the negative. However, now I have a job. I'm able to drive my car. I can own a home and all that good stuff. So I think for me, it was just surprising to know that there's a whole bunch of us, positive, negative, in between the spectrum. So for me, it just brought up so many other new topics that I wanted to talk about, like imposter syndrome, victim mentality. How do we get rid of that? How other dreamers, documented individuals, how have they not used that victim mentality? Like, what made them feel so empowered by our situation, especially during this pandemic as well? And with that being said, like, what did you learn from this? Was there any takeaway that you got to learn about an individual, other speakers, or just collectively?
Um, something that I learned that was new. I think the spectrum of people struggling, you know. There was people who you said were so empowering and so positive and uplifting and so energetic, and they taken that with them the whole way. And there was some people that were dealing with like really, really deep depression and anxiety, and you know, to the point of like not be actually living. Um, so it was discouraging to learn that we have so much trauma collectively, um, that we're still carrying around, and that we, most of the time, and at least for me, for the past 20 plus years before I started to do my personal work, I carry it with me without noticing that it was an issue, you know. So I was lucky enough to realize that I needed help, and that I, you know, there was something that needed to change. But it was new and surprising to me to see that people have sort of internalized this and make it part of their life and carry it with them. I think that's something that was nuanced to me. I was like, because I guess for myself, I'm like, I got to the point where I needed help, or you know, or I was gonna go to even darker places. So I guess I was always expecting or hoping that people will get to that point of realizing that they need help as well. But you know, it's not the case. What about for you?
I think for me, I learned so many. I learned from so many of others people's experiences, in the sense of, again, there's a spectrum of, some of us get all the help, we have all these resources to get a therapist, to group therapy, or our colleges provide this, or we just have that best friend that has taken on that role of just listening to us. And then there's others of us that we can't break from that. We come from a home that we don't talk about mental health. A lot of the individuals that were on Clubhouse the other day, they mentioned how it was not talked about in homes. So you don't talk about it. It's a hush hush situation. You want to talk about your feelings? We're not doing that here. We don't talk about it. And other people talked, especially the men in Clubhouse, they talked about how in their household, the dad was like, we don't talk about our feelings, we just man up and we keep going with our lives. And that was just, it's not shocking to me. I think we all know that in the Latinx community, we have that machismo where it's like the men have to hold everything together. They can't show emotion. They have to like keep our families together, be powerful, whatever it may be. And so it just pushes that trauma all the way down. Even for us women, it's like we still have to hold it down because our moms are like, no, we don't talk about it either. Regardless of who we go to in our families, they just are like, we're not going to talk about it. Si se puede, we keep going until le ganas, whatever it may be, whatever the phrase is in our family, we just keep going. And so one thing that I've like learned from this is that a lot of us have this crisis as we're growing up, because it's like we've never talked about it. We had one Clubhouse member just talk about his whole experience and all the little traumas and big traumas that occurred for him. And you can just hear it in his voice, of the passion, the discouragement, the lies, like everything. It was just, a lot of us don't have this space where we can talk about our feelings. And hearing from other people, we know who these people are that were discouraged to talk about it, or this is their first time being able to vent to one of us, or to anyone really. And for me, it was just huge to learn that some of us still don't have this space. And I think us creating Dream Collective on Clubhouse is creating a space for people to just vent, and also just hear other people out and connect, like, hey, you crossed the border, I did too. We were about the same age. What was your experience like crossing the desert, having no food to eat? Those experiences, it's trauma. And some of us don't talk about it, and we need somebody to just relate to us, to listen to us. And, maybe in that conversation, we're able to refer them to a therapist or refer them somewhere, And I think it's very important, because we're, the thing I learned, I think, was we all have depression, we all have anxiety at some point, at different spectrums too. And for
Yep.
me, it was just like, let me also just let them know, like, there are people out there that want to help us. And I know in each state is different, but I think a quick little plug is like, if anybody needs a therapist and they're searching for the therapist that's Latina, Latino, Latinx, whatever it may be, there's Latinx therapy where you can search up a therapist near you. A lot of them are more on the West Coast, but right now with the pandemic, a lot of the therapists are providing virtual over the phone appointments, consultations. So if there's anybody out there that's hearing this, go search up Latinx therapy and see if there's a therapist that can do a sliding scale in the sense that maybe they can charge less because they know you're a low income, you're an immigrant, or they just want to do pro bono. So that's my little spiel there. And I think, what was the most, like, the biggest takeaway for you then, Christian?
My biggest takeaway and hope, as you said, is for this dream collective to grow even farther. With everything we're doing in Clubhouse, we are creating this safe space for everyone to come together and to share their experiences and to speak up. For the longest time, most of us have been silenced. So this is a nuance even for our own community, right? So I'm excited to just have the conversations, and that in it itself, it's healing because we are being heard for a lot of us for the first time about our experience. And I feel like that's one big thing that has been therapeutic for me. That's why I've been so outspoken about my experience being a Daca recipient and growing up undocumented. It was that notion that someone was going to hear this and be inspired, right? And that is my biggest takeaway, is that conversation builds community and community heals itself when we're being honest and safe and empathetic with each other. So that's my biggest takeaway. I think we have to continue these conversations about mental health because we need to normalize them. We need to push them forward to the main line. Like, we need to make this part of our lives because it is, in many cases, the thin line between fulfillment and being unhappy, you know? So that's my biggest hope. What is your biggest takeaway?
I think you said everything so beautifully that I'm just going to sound like I'm repeating myself. But yeah, basically it's like we created this club on Clubhouse, or we're going to in anyways, but we're creating these weekly rooms so that we can talk and share about our experiences, so we can heal together the little traumas, the big traumas, and relate to one another. I think the other biggest takeaway that I had was the fact that not everyone has access to a therapist. I'm lucky enough that I'm able to have a Latina immigrant therapist who's able to help me on all these little steps in my journey that can relate to me, to be telling me like, tú eres una chingona, you can keep going, knows everything about me. But I know, again, not everyone's privileged. And again, the other thing is we're going through a pandemic. We can't afford this. So why not take advantage of Clubhouse, this platform where we can heal together? It's like, oh, okay, right. Christian, you have this therapist, or this other speaker has a therapist. Like, oh, this therapist told me XYZ on how to help me with my anxiety, going for a walk, journaling. And I think just being able to share our own resources with each other was like another one of the other biggest takeaways. It's like, hey, if journaling doesn't work, why don't you try going on a quick 5-minute walk in the morning, or walk when you have all this anxiety that's happening, or even cook. Or somebody else I think had mentioned, they switch their narrative. They're thinking about that negative thing of like, I'm not perfect enough. And then they switch back to, I'm doing what I can, right?
Yeah.
So all these little tips and tricks we're sharing with each other. And that's like the beauty of what we've been starting with Dream Collective, just sharing our resources and everything.
Amen. I think we're this is turning out to be in many ways a community of healing. So I see it as group therapy, and I'm excited to reach out to even more people that I know are going to benefit from this. So with that being said, remember guys to follow us at Clubhouse on Instagram. That's where we keep you guys all updated on upcoming topics, our times for our meetings, and that's where we're going to grow our community. What else do you want to say, Liz?
I just to add on to that, follow us, follow each other when we're talking on Clubhouse. That way, if you relate to one story, you can hit that person up on their Instagram, Twitter, whatever it may be. Follow us. Also, you can go ahead and DM us if you have any topics you want us to just start talking about. We had so many that we talked about a little bit here and there in this mental health room. So I'm super excited. Again, if there's one you just want to help co-host or moderate, let us know and go ahead and just DM us.
Sounds good. So we'll see you next time. Bye.